John List, the father who erased his family, the perfect family illusion. In the early 1970s, the quiet town of Westfield, New Jersey, was a kind of place where neighbors knew each other, lawns were neatly trimmed, and doors were left unlocked. It was a peaceful suburb, seemingly far from the chaos of the outside world. Nestled in that peace stood an impressive Victorian mansion called Breeze Knoll. It belonged to the List family. By all appearances, the embodiment of middle-class success and conservative American values. The patriarch, John Emil List, was a man of discipline. Born in 1925 in Bay City, Michigan, John was the only child of strict German-American parents. He served honorably in World War II and the Korean War. He earned a master's degree in accounting from the University of Michigan and was known for his devout Lutheran beliefs, unwavering punctuality, and moral rigidity. He married Helen Taylor in 1951. Together, they raised 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. Along with John's elderly mother, Alma, they lived under one roof in the grand 19-room mansion. To the outside world, John List had achieved the American dream, a stable career, a beautiful home, and a loving family. But behind the closed doors of Breeze Knoll, a storm was brewing. Helen was chronically ill, both physically and mentally. She suffered from syphilis, an illness she contracted before their marriage, and often drank heavily to cope. The marriage was strained, and Helen's illness, compounded by secrecy and pride, left John increasingly isolated. As the 1960s gave way to a more progressive, expressive generation, their teenage daughter Patricia aspired to become an actress. John disapproved. He believed his children were becoming corrupted by modern values, drifting from what he considered the right path. It was a household wrapped in silence, moral expectations, and control. The pressure to maintain appearances was crushing, and when John lost his job, the illusion began to crack, a life unraveling. In 1971, John was fired from his accounting job at a Jersey City bank. He had trouble holding down positions due to his aloof personality and rigid demeanor, but telling his family the truth was, to him, unthinkable. So he didn't. Each day, he left the house dressed in a suit, carrying a briefcase. But instead of going to work, he sat in train stations or libraries, reading newspapers and pretending. He cashed in his mother's savings to pay the bills, but it wasn't enough. Mortgage payments were overdue. The mansion, inherited from Helen's wealthy father, was becoming impossible to maintain. John feared humiliation. He feared being seen as a failure by his community, his church, and even God. But more than anything, he feared losing control. He watched as his children grew more independent, as his wife withdrew further into illness, and as his carefully constructed world slipped from his grasp. Religious conviction and pride collided into delusion. John began to believe that the only way to protect his family from eternal damnation, from the shame of poverty, sin, and disgrace, was to kill them. In his mind, he would not be destroying his family. He would be saving them. He planned the murders for weeks. He purchased ammunition. He wrote a confession letter to his pastor. He chose a specific day when all of his children would be at school or returning home alone. That day was November 9th, 1971, the day of the murders. On the morning of November 9th, 1971, John List calmly executed his plan. After sending his children off to school, he walked into the kitchen where his wife Helen was having coffee. He raised a 9mm handgun and shot her in the back of the head. He then climbed the stairs and entered the third-floor apartment where his mother, Alma, lived. He shot her above the left eye with his .22 revolver. She died instantly. He dragged Helen's body into the ballroom, laying her on a sleeping bag. Alma, due to her weight, was left upstairs. Then he waited. His daughter Patricia, 16, was the first to return home. He shot her in the back of the head. Then came Frederick, just 13 years old. He was also killed without warning. Finally, John Jr., 15 years old, came home after soccer practice. Unlike the others, he fought back. Evidence showed John Jr. was shot multiple times in the chest and face. It was the only part of the plan that seemed to have gone wrong. In the end, all 5 members of his family were dead. John made sandwiches, cleaned up, and placed all the bodies except his mother's, in sleeping bags in the ballroom. He turned on religious music throughout the house using the intercom system. Then he sat down and wrote a 5-page confession letter to his pastor. In it, he explained his actions, saying he feared his family was straying from God and that he couldn't bear to see them suffer in the sinful world. He left instructions for the burial. He turned down the heat. He shut off lights in every room, except for one. Then he vanished. The discovery. Weeks passed. Neighbors noticed the house was eerily quiet. The lights were always on. The shades were always drawn. And the List children, usually active and social, hadn't been seen. Teachers called. The mail piled up. Eventually, a concerned neighbor contacted the police. On December 7th, 1971, officers entered the mansion. The smell hit them first. Then they found the bodies. Classical music still echoed faintly through the halls. The ballroom, once used for family gatherings, had become a crypt. On the table was a confession addressed to Reverend Eugene Rewinkle. It explained everything and justified it all. The nation was horrified. A man had murdered his entire family and disappeared without a trace. And despite a nationwide manhunt, John List had vanished, leaving behind no photographs, no recent records, no trail. 18 years on the run. For 18 years, John List evaded capture. He had changed his identity to Robert Peter Clark, moved to Denver, Colorado, and later to Virginia. He joined a Lutheran church. He remarried a widow named Dolores. He lived quietly, blending into the suburbs, just like before. He had burned all photographs of himself to slow down police. And for nearly 2 decades, it worked. Then, in 1989, his face appeared on the hit TV show America's Most Wanted. A forensic artist, Frank Bender, created a clay sculpture of what List might look like after 18 years. It included glasses, receding hairline, and a stern jaw based not just on aging but psychology. The sculpture was remarkably accurate. A viewer in Virginia recognized him and called the FBI. John List was arrested on June 1st, 1989, living under his fake name, working as an accountant and attending church regularly. Even his new wife had no idea. Section 6, Trial, Prison, and Death. List's trial began in 1990. His defense claimed he suffered from PTSD and obsessive-compulsive disorder, but the jury was unconvinced. His calm demeanor, lack of remorse, and methodical planning painted the picture of a cold, calculated killer, not a man in crisis. He was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without parole. He never expressed real regret. John List died in prison in 2008 at age 82. He left behind no will and no apology. A psychological profile. Psychologists have since studied the case extensively. List fits the profile of what criminologists call a family annihilator, a person, usually male, who murders his entire family, often due to financial pressure, a need for control, or a delusional belief in protecting loved ones from perceived ruin. But John List was different. He didn't lash out in rage. He planned his killings with cold precision. To him, the act was a moral decision, not a violent one. That's what made it even more chilling. Experts believe his extreme religious beliefs, combined with narcissism, rigidity, and repression, created a dangerous psychological storm. These are the stories that stay with us, not just because of the horror, but because of the silence that led up to it. John List's family didn't die all at once. They died slowly, in a house filled with secrets, fear, and emotional distance. This case reminds us how important it is to talk about mental health, acknowledge pressure, and ask for help when things start to fall apart. If you or someone you know is struggling, financially, mentally, or emotionally, there is support. There's always a better path than silence. Because sometimes it's not evil we're facing, it's despair. Subscribe for the next episode. Chris Watts, the modern father with a deadly secret.